Hi, it's Leandra at New Vocations Resource Adoption Program. Today, for our trainer tip, we're going to be talking about working with horses and helping them work through issues that they might have, specifically regarding having their ears touched. So if you've been around horses for just about any amount of time, you might realize that some horses just have things that they don't really like touched about them. Maybe you're dealing with a horse who's having some issues with girthing, and maybe you've seen another horse who just doesn't like their ears being touched. Now, we might not always get a background story about why they feel that way or what might have happened to them. Routinely, when horses come in, we're finding that they have issues with little things on our own, and we just don't know what the story is, and that's okay, because we want to help them move forward. And to do that, we're going to take into consideration everything that they're telling us, using their body language about how they feel about it, and then trying to expand those limitations, those boundaries that they have mentally, to help us be able to crack the code about the physical things that we're seeing. So, this is Java. He's a little bit of a unique horse in our program. He was a pony horse on the track, so he's a lot older than most of the horses who we have in our program. He's 17 years old, and because of that, we know that he has had issues with his ears in the past, but he's had a lot of time now to reinforce those neurologic pathways that remind him that he hates his ears being touched. So when we work through that, it's actually, sometimes easier to work with younger horses because they're a little bit more malleable and trainable with some of these things, but not to say that Java can't learn. It just means that maybe he has a little more history with this issue. So first and foremost, let's kind of give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's just interact with him and see how he feels about different things. And what we're doing is we're trying to find those red zones. We're trying to find the things that he is like, no, I hate this. So we're going to see what his limitations are, and we're going to back off from them and kind of try to figure out where that yellow zone is. So green, we'll say, is I'm really comfortable in this space. So you can tell even with me sort of different areas, I'm not even touching him, but he's like, I don't really like that. So we might say, okay, we're still in the yellow zone here, but if I'm waving my arm around here, Java doesn't really mind that. So we're going to say this is kind of the yellow zone here. You don't really need an exact label onto the space of it, but just understanding that even this he's going to be really cautious of. And then if I go to touch his ears, he says, hell no, don't like that. So there's his red zone. So even that, we get a really good basic understanding of what those different areas of comfort he has are, and that's going to help us to create a baseline for moving forward and progressing. But then also just knowing the spaces we have to work with, because if you just try to rush right into the red zone, horses are instinctually going to tap into that fight or flight area. So flight is generally a horse's first go-to, and if they can't do that, then they might try to get into the fight area. If they feel backed into a corner, if they can't escape from it, and you're just rushing into the red zone, then they're going to, in more cases than not, instinctually find a way to fight you about it. We want to avoid that. So let's try to push the boundaries of where that yellow zone is so that we can try to eventually, we're not going to ask for perfection up front, of course, especially with a horse who has really ingrained behavioral patterns, but eventually we'd like to see that red zone dissipating. We can work in the yellow zone, we can get him used to it. Now, Java and I have already worked with this a little bit, so hopefully we have some baseline to work off of, and hopefully he's made some progress. But we'll start by saying that if you have a horse who doesn't really like their ears being touched, and again, we don't want to get emotionally exhausted ourselves, we don't want to push them past their limits, that it's a lot easier sometimes to work with a rope halter, a halter that you can open up, so that when you need to handle a horse, if I need to take him out to turnout, we still want him to have some sort of a normal lifestyle while we're working on this, that you can see we're at the point where Java's not, you can see his eye is a little bit cautious, but he's okay here. We can function like this. We can get a halter on him. so that we can take him out to turnout. He can have time playing with his friends, and we can function in this sort of way. Now let's try to play around here. You can see Java's getting very cautious at this point. His eyes get really big when I start to have my hand here. So if I were trying to get him to the point where I want to take the halter off this way and unclip, that he would kind of be like, no thanks. Let's take a step back and say that Java, until very recently, had a pretty nasty fungus in his ear that's now been treated. So the physical part of this has been removed. He is otherwise healthy. And the thing that probably was a big part of the reason he developed that behavioral pattern is no longer there. So we're right now just dealing with the mental part of that limitation. That is really hard set. Like I said, big old strong neurologic pathways, like super highways that have been reiterated over time so that it has become, you know, what might have been like a dirt road where it said like, I don't really like that, and is now like touching ears is bad. It is now a super highway, so by default he goes there. We're going to try to create new little pathways that are going to start out as dirt pathways, but introducing the idea that maybe it's not going to be a super painful, super terrible experience. So let's get back to it. So if we're exploring those different boundary areas, let's see what we can do. So we know that he's not going to be a super fan here, up by his ears, but I'm going to kind of explore this yellow area. Obviously he's not opposed to me touching him in other ways. He's okay with it. He's listening to what I'm doing. He's kind of knowing that I'm getting back towards the head, but he's being a really good sport about it. So a lot of times people will try to, like I said, rush into the red zone or try to stay there. And even horses don't really act like that. So if they say there was some unfamiliar object or like a scary, let's say a tarp on the ground, horses don't just leap right onto that tarp, especially if it's scary to them. They don't rush in. They might cautiously explore it, touch it, run away from it, come back to it. They're curious by nature. And so even with them, they approach things on a sort of touch and go basis. So we're going to try to get near those discomfort areas, back off from it, go back into a green area, and then reapproach it to just warm up to the idea of it. So with Java here, let's sort of just love on him, try to get him to relax a little bit, because horses don't really make adjustments when they're in brace mode. If they are embracing, that's sort of the nervous part, the fight or flight zone. We want to stay away from that. Ideally, we want him to be really comfortable. So I'm going to kind of start to sort of pat on him and get up in the area that I know that he's, like, let's say that we're getting into real red zone here, and his red zone was a lot bigger before. But let's just give him a good old rub down and be in that area, but then come off of it. Same sort of thing. And I'm keeping this hand here because I also want to create a safety barrier for myself. So if he reacts, I don't want to get knocked in the head, especially since I'm not wearing a helmet, which a lot of times I will wear on the ground, because that is where the majority of my concussions have come from, is when I'm just working with a horse on the ground, not even under saddle, and you get knocked in the head because their heads are around 40 pounds, if not more. It's a lot to get hit by that, especially in close proximity. So you can see Java starting to really relax here. His eye is starting to soften. He has moments where he is concerned, but overall he is feeling pretty comfortable here. And that is good. So let's say that our overall goal, at least for the time being, because we can always adjust our goals, is to get Java to the point where he's relaxed with a little bit more close boundaries, but we can touch, and that he's not going to just be immediately in the red zone. So right now we're getting a pretty good reaction, and even it's a good litmus test to be able to stop what you're doing, to stop all the tactile parts of it, and then be able to replicate it. You can see he immediately was like, no thanks. So we might need a little bit more repetition here, and just being at a point where he is comfortable and not just always thinking we're going to get to that point. So we're just going to be fussing around with him a lot. And again, you have 17, well, we don't know exactly, but let's just say upwards of 10 years of reinforcement of this behavior. So this is not going to happen in one day. But what I would like to see from Java is that we can get him to be receptive to putting his head down and being comfortable there, even if we're up in this area. Because, and we've already done a little bit of work on this, because when I'm trying to do something like put the reins over his head, that because of this reaction that he has, he actually will put his head up into the reins and then has that touch, the discomfort, because he's put his head up into the thing that we're trying to avoid. He doesn't want to be touched in the ears, and then he's putting his head up into the reins as I'm trying to put the reins over his head. So obviously for his own benefit, and it's hard to reason with him on this, we've tried, is that I would love for him to be able to just be more receptive to putting his head down, so that hopefully we can put the reins over his head just to start with, and that he won't have to then deal with the discomfort that he's trying to avoid by putting his head up into the reins. I want him to just get used to putting his head down, being comfortable there, and then having something go over his head, because you can see his yellow zone is way outside of the actual touching area. So I don't have a lead rope with me right now, so what I'm going to do is to put my thumb up under the halter, and that's going to allow me to kind of slip it out if I need to, but be able to put some pressure on his nose. If you have a lead rope, especially one with a chain, if you need to have a little bit more obvious contact, you're not doing it to apply more force, just to have more obvious contact for pressure. And Java's a little bit familiar with this exercise now, so you can, maybe you saw that he was licking and chewing, but we would spend some good time here. You can, if you're familiar with any sort of body work exercise, use a very soft touch, a touch that would be light enough that you wouldn't even break an egg yolk with it, to find little areas of tension. And that might be where you recognize that he's blinking more rapidly, or maybe you notice a twitch in his nose. But you can spend a little bit of time seeing if you can get him to release, and you can see his head's dropping pretty quickly, even though we have one of the kittens playing with Rambo right there. So there's some activity around us, and still he's feeling very relaxed right now. And that's great. And as long as he's relaxed, we can hang out here. If not, then we would back off from this amount of contact and maybe try something a little bit lower, something that was in a more obvious place of relaxation for him. Now, when I had the lead rope, which I don't have right now, like I mentioned, what I would try to do is just to take the lead rope up over his head. And if he has a reaction like that, that's okay. We can work with that. We want to really get at least to the point where he is not feeling like he has to get away from the action. But then we would come back to this. We'd get back to a point of relaxation. And you'll notice with more repetition that it happens more quickly. Like even as I put a little bit of pressure on, and I can sort of loosen him up this way, that even getting to this point where he was willing to just drop his head while my hand is behind his ears like this is progress. So it might not seem like it, but it's definitely progress from where he was before. And this is just going to take a tremendous amount of patience. So we're not going to show it all today in this video. We're just hopefully going to be able to check in maybe in a few weeks and show a little more progress. But right now I'm just working with Java on relaxing, and he has little points where he will brace, which is why I'm kind of rocking to see if I can get him to give more. I'm not forcing his head down at all. That's important because, again, horses are not going to have any sort of new learning or actual relaxation if they're bracing. So I want him to find a comfort. There we go. And then when we get it, that's fantastic. And I might, like I said, have a little bit of pressure, but not enough that would even break an egg yolk up here behind his ears. I'm asking only at the moment, very slightly from where his nose is. We'll just get him to relax. And you can see his eyes starting to soften a little bit. He's still a little cautious. And he's got some flies on him right now, which is not the best situation for relaxation. But we're just showing a little bit here. Good boy. And then I can try to use very small circles, relaxing massage. And again, this is all just a work in progress. This takes a very long amount of time and patience. Like, I always plan, if I'm really diving into this, to set aside probably an hour for each one of these sessions to work with him on this. It is a difficult situation. You can see there's a little bit harder blinking going on, a little bit relaxed. We've got some licking and chewing. So this area is a perfect one to hang out in for Java right now, because he's releasing tension. He's really comfortable with this idea of my hand being right here, putting his head down, and I'm trying to get a very organic sense of his relaxation point. And that means accepting when you have points where he was wanting to step away from it and then go back to it. So maybe we come back to just sort of rubbing him down on the neck, just hanging out in this area. And this is all about building up that threshold, expanding the yellow area, an area that we can have a little bit more workability, and trying to eliminate gradually that red zone. So it's really about connecting with them, observing their comfort with different areas, and then finding ways to get them, to encourage them to relax in a way that makes it so they're still mentally malleable and receptive to the idea of creating an organic type of behavioral change. I think we'll leave it there for today, because obviously this is something we could go on and on about. If you have other tips and tricks, things that you want to share that you've found that work, feel free to add that to the comments section. You can type it in so that other people might be able to connect with you, communicate. If you have questions, feel free to type those into the comments box as well. We can certainly expand on this further, but thank you so much for joining us today for this Trainer Tip Tuesday, where we're talking about expanding those mental boundaries and working with horses through difficult issues, especially those involving physical touch. So again, thanks for joining us. Check out our website at newvocations.org to see some of the horses who are adoptable now and get a little bit more information about New Vocations Racehorse Adoption Program in general. And hopefully you'll tune back in later and join us for future videos.